What if I told you that the only barrier between life and certain death for thousands of people was a thin wall of compressed mud? The history of the American frontier is often presented to us as a series of shootouts and gold rushes, but the real battle was not with bandits, but with nature itself. It was a silent war, where the main weapon was an axe and the fortress was a hastily built hut. Families who risked everything for a new life found themselves face to face with a merciless element that did not forgive mistakes or weakness. They built their shelters from what the earth provided, turning snow, wood, and even turf into symbols of hope. Every house in the Wild West is a monument to human stubbornness, standing on bones and sweat-soaked earth. Watch the video to the end to learn how simple architecture saved sanity in conditions of complete isolation, and why an ordinary stove became the center of the universe for a settler. What if I told you that everything you believed about cozy wooden houses was untrue for most of the first settlers? On the Great Plains, where there was not a single tree for hundreds of miles around, people were forced to burrow into the ground like moles. Sod houses, or soddies, became the most common and most hated type of housing for those who came to conquer these lands. Construction began with cutting layers of sod, densely intertwined with the roots of prairie grass, which was incredibly heavy and durable. These bricks of earth and grass were laid on top of each other to form thick walls capable of withstanding hurricane-force winds. The roof was also often covered with earth, which put incredible pressure on the supporting structures and required constant repair. Life in such a house resembled existence in a dark, damp cellar where it was never completely dry. During prolonged rains, the roof did not start to leak immediately, but only after a few days when the earth was saturated with water. Dirty sludge dripped onto beds, tables, and clothes, turning everyday life into a never-ending battle with dirt. The turf walls were an excellent habitat for various insects, which fell directly onto sleeping people. The constant smell of damp earth clung to the skin and clothes, reminding the settlers that they were literally living inside the soil. The windows in such houses were tiny and cost a fortune, so it was always dim inside. During the day, there was barely enough light to do housework, and in the evenings, the only source of light was a dim oil lamp or candle. The lack of ventilation meant that the air was stuffy and heavy, especially in winter when the door was rarely open. People suffocated from the smoke of the hearth mixed with the smells of cooking and unwashed bodies. This confined space weighed more heavily on the psyche than the open spaces of the prairies. I wonder how this topic is perceived in different parts of the world. Where are you from? Do you agree that living conditions determine consciousness, or is man stronger than his environment? Share your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see more stories about man's struggle with nature. Are you ready to learn the truth about how silence can drive you mad? In the highlands of the Rocky Mountains and the Northern Territories, snow became the settlers' main enemy. Here, where forests grew, people built classic log cabins, which looked so romantic in pictures. But in winter, these cozy houses turned into traps, covered with snow up to the chimney. Blizzards could last for weeks, completely cutting off families from the outside world and making it impossible to go outside. Log cabins for wintering in the mountains were built differently than ordinary houses on the plains, taking into account the enormous snow load. The roofs were made with a steep slope so that the snow would slide down under its own weight without breaking the rafters. The logs were fitted together with maximum precision, and the gaps were caulked with moss and clay. The slightest crack could cause the house to cool down overnight, threatening the lives of all its inhabitants. It was a sealed capsule designed to preserve every bit of heat in the icy desert. Inside such a house, eternal twilight reigned in winter, as the windows were often completely covered with snowdrifts. People dug tunnels in the snow to get to the woodshed or the cattle pen. Life turned into an existence in an icy labyrinth, where every trip outside was a risky expedition. Losing your bearings during a blizzard just 10 meters from the door meant certain death. A rope stretched from the porch to the outbuildings was the only lifeline. Heating such a log cabin required an incredible amount of firewood, which was harvested throughout the summer and fall. The huge fireplace or stove had to burn around the clock, consuming fuel reserves at an alarming rate. If the firewood ran out before spring arrived, the inhabitants of the log cabin were doomed to freeze to death slowly. Sometimes they had to burn furniture and even parts of the house itself to survive the last frosty days. The struggle for warmth became an obsession, crowding out all other thoughts. Moisture was another hidden enemy in a snow-covered house, one that is rarely talked about. Condensation formed on the cold walls from people's breath and the heat of the stove, which then turned to ice. The corners froze and drafts blew through the house, despite all efforts to insulate it. Clothes and bedding were always slightly damp, increasing the risk of illness and hypothermia. Drying things was a real problem in a crowded and poorly ventilated space. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of solitude? Unlike settlers, trappers and mountain hunters built their homes not for families, but for one person, and that changed everything. Their huts were masterpieces of minimalism and camouflage, hidden in the most remote corners of the forest. A trapper did not need a large house. He needed a place that was easy to heat and difficult to spot. Such huts were often no larger than a modern storage room, where one could only lie down or sit. Construction was quick, often using natural shelters such as caves or overhanging rocks. The hunter would attach 3 wooden sides to a stone wall, saving time and energy. The roof was covered with bark and pine branches, camouflaging it as forest litter, so that the dwelling blended in with the landscape from above. The door was made low and narrow to retain heat and make it difficult for predators or enemies to enter. It was more of a den than a house in the usual sense. The hearth in a trapper's dwelling was designed with particular ingenuity so as not to reveal the presence of humans. Smoke was the main factor that could give away their location, attracting the attention of hostile tribes from many miles away. Therefore, they used dry wood of certain species that produced little smoke, or built chimneys with diffusers. Sometimes the fire was lit only at night, when the smoke was not visible against the dark sky. The ability to be invisible was the key to survival for a lone trapper. Inside the hut, there was perfect order, dictated by strict necessity and lack of space. All equipment, traps, gunpowder, and provisions hung on the walls or lay on shelves under the ceiling. The floor was often raised above the ground to protect against dampness and small rodents. The skins of hunted animals served as both bedding and insulation for the walls. Every item had its place and a dual purpose. Loneliness shaped the mountain people's unique psychology and attitude toward their dwellings. The hut was not just a place to sleep, but the only safe space in a vast hostile world. Here the hunter could relax, repair his equipment, and wait out the bad weather talking to himself. The silence of the walls became a familiar companion, and the crackling of the fire replaced human speech. It was a world where man became part of nature, not its conqueror. The life of a trapper in his shelter was similar to that of a hermit monk. Only instead of prayers, there was a daily struggle for life. These people proved that a person needs very little for happiness and freedom, just a roof over their head and a fire. Their experience formed the basis of many modern survival techniques. Don't forget to like this if you are impressed by the resourcefulness of these people. Guess what happened next when families came to these lands? For settlers in the Southwest, especially in Arizona and New Mexico, a home had to be more than just a shelter from the weather. It had to be a real fortress. The threat of raids by Apache or Comanche tribes dictated their harsh architectural laws. Aesthetics and comfort took a backseat to ballistics and fortification. Each farm was designed as an autonomous defensive unit. The walls of such houses were made unusually thick, using adobe, stone, or thick logs. They had to withstand bullets and serve as reliable protection against burning arrows. Wood was not used on the outside to prevent attackers from setting fire to the building. The windows were made narrow, similar to the loopholes of medieval castles, and were placed high above the ground. This allowed fire to be directed from the inside while remaining relatively safe. Doors were the most vulnerable spot, so they were reinforced with particular care. Thick oak planks were used, nailed together in several layers, and powerful wrought iron bolts. Often there was only one door to reduce the number of points of entry. Inside the house, directly opposite the entrance, additional barricades or walls could be built. This gave the defenders an advantage if the enemy did break down the door. The area around the house was always cleared of bushes and tall grass within rifle range. This prevented attackers from approaching the walls unnoticed. The open space, or field of death, was a crucial element of passive defense. Anyone who attempted to cross this zone became an easy target. Settlers constantly monitored this area to ensure that nature did not overgrow this protective perimeter. Water was a critical resource during a siege, which could last several days. Therefore, wells were often dug directly inside the house or connected to the house by a covered passageway. If this was not possible, huge barrels of water were always kept in the house. The lack of water forced the defenders to leave their shelter, which was tantamount to suicide. A system for collecting rainwater from the roof was also part of the defensive strategy. The house was a defense, but it was also a prison. How would you organize the defense of your home with only 19th century technology? In the next chapter, we will learn about a house that was always with you, but was never safe. The migrant wagon, the famous prairie schooner, was the most paradoxical type of dwelling. It was a house that moved but offered virtually no protection. For a family embarking on a journey lasting several months, the wagon became everything: a bedroom, a storeroom, a kitchen, and a fortress. But its walls of oiled canvas could not stop a bullet or the cold wind. People lived in constant jolting and noise, deprived of basic peace and quiet. The living space inside the wagon was tiny, about 1.2 meters wide and 3 meters long. This space had to accommodate 6 months' worth of provisions, tools, furniture, and the family itself. There was often not enough space to sleep, and people had to sleep sitting up or on boxes. In good weather, the men and older people slept under the wagon on the ground. There was no personal space as such. Everyone lived in close physical contact. The canvas top stretched over wooden arches was the only roof over their heads. It protected them from the sun and light rain, but often leaked during heavy downpours. In the heat, the inside of the wagon created a greenhouse effect, turning it into an oven. Dust kicked up by the wheels and oxen's hooves got everywhere, covering everything in a thick layer. Life in the wagon was a constant battle against dirt and discomfort. Organizing daily life in such a confined space required miracles of logistics and order. Every item had to have its own strictly defined place. Otherwise, it would be impossible to find it in the chaos of belongings. Losing any small item, such as a needle or a knife, could become a serious problem on the road. The women managed to create comfort even here, hanging bags with things from the roof arches. It was an attempt to maintain the structure of normal life on the move. Food was cooked over a fire during stops, but in bad weather this became impossible. Then the family ate dry rations, sitting in a cramped wagon rocking in the wind. The lack of hot food and normal rest quickly depleted the traveler's strength. Disease spread instantly in such conditions, and there was nowhere to isolate the sick. The wagon could quickly turn into a hospital on wheels. To protect against attacks, the wagons were placed in a circle at night, forming a temporary fortification. The wagons, linked together, created a barrier for the attackers' horses and shelter for the archers. Inside the circle, livestock was herded and fires were lit, creating an island of safety in the dark steppe. This tactic was effective against raids but useless against snipers. The night camp was the only time when one could feel relatively safe. Repairing the wagon was a constant concern for the men, as a breakdown on the road could cost lives. Wooden wheels dried out in the heat, axles broke on rocks, and fabric tore in the wind. The settlers carried spare wood and tools with them, becoming carpenters and blacksmiths by necessity. The ability to repair one's home on the go was a critical skill. An abandoned wagon was a tragic symbol of shattered hopes. Children in wagons grew up looking at the world through the rear curtain, watching the road recede. For them, it was a normal way of life, constant movement and changing landscapes. They learned to read from the only book in the house, the Bible, while jolting over bumps in the road. Their toys were rocks and sticks found at campsites. This generation grew up with an innate sense of restlessness. Are you ready to learn the truth about how dirt can save you from the heat? In the desert Southwest, where trees were rare and the sun could kill in a matter of hours, settlers adopted the technologies of indigenous peoples and Spaniards. They built houses out of Adobe, unfired bricks made of clay, sand, and straw. This material had unique properties that were ideal for the extreme desert climate. The clay walls acted as natural air conditioning that modern technology can only dream of. The adobe walls were often more than half a meter thick, creating a huge thermal mass. During the day, these walls slowly absorbed the heat of the scorching sun, preventing it from penetrating inside the dwelling. Inside, a refreshing coolness was maintained, with a temperature difference of up to 15 degrees. At night, when the desert cooled rapidly, the walls released the accumulated heat back into the house. It was an ingenious cycle of energy exchange that did not require electricity. Making bricks was a laborious process that involved the entire community. Clay was mixed with water and straw by foot in large pits, then molded into wooden frames and dried in the sun for weeks. Each brick bore the handprints and footprints of its creators. The quality of the brick depended on the correct proportions of ingredients. Too much sand and it would crumble, too much clay and it would crack. It was an art passed down from generation to generation. The roofs of such houses were flat and also made of earth, laid on beams of rare poplar or pine trunks. The earth on the roof served as additional insulation from the sun. Bunches of chili peppers and dried herbs often hung from these beams, creating a unique aroma. However, these roofs required constant care and maintenance after every rare rainfall. A leaky mud roof meant streams of liquid clay flowing directly into the living room. The interior finish of adobes was also made of clay, which was carefully smoothed and often whitewashed with lime. The white walls reflected light, making dark rooms brighter and visually more spacious. The floor was also earthen, but it was impregnated with ox blood or oil for hardness and shine. Such a surface was surprisingly smooth and durable, similar to polished stone. This gave the interior a strict aesthetic beauty. The windows in adobe houses were small and deeply recessed into thick walls, which created additional shade. Often, mica or simple wooden shutters were used instead of glass, which were closed during the hottest part of the day. This created a cave-like atmosphere inside, protected from the glare of the outside light. The dim light was conducive to rest and kept the interior cool. It gave the eyes a break from the endless desert horizon. Even today, many modern homes in the Southwest are built with imitations of this technology, recognizing its effectiveness. The environmental friendliness and energy efficiency of adobe are back in vogue. But back then, it was the only way to survive in the desert furnace. Could you live in a house whose walls had to be constantly coated with clay? In the next chapter, we will move from the silence of the desert to the noise and chaos of railroad towns. Along the transcontinental railroad under construction, completely different settlements emerged, temporary, noisy, and chaotic. They were called Hell on Wheels, and this name fully reflected the essence of life in them. Housing here consisted of tents, hastily erected barracks, and sheds made from old sails. It was architecture of the moment, designed to last a couple of weeks until the rails moved further west. Tent cities sprang up literally overnight wherever the supply train stopped. The streets were makeshift passages in the mud between rows of canvas walls. There was no sewage system, no planning, just functional crowding. One large tent could house a dining room, a dormitory, and a gambling house all at once. Life here was bustling around the clock, leaving no opportunity for privacy. The fabric walls provided no sound insulation, so noise was a constant companion for the residents. The pounding of hammers, the whistles of locomotives, the shouts and music from the saloons merged into a single hum. It was difficult to sleep in such conditions, and people lived in a state of chronic sleep deprivation. Private conversations became the property of all neighbors. There were no secrets in such a camp. Thin canvas was an illusion of a wall, not a real barrier. The wind on the plains was merciless to light structures, tearing down tents and carrying them away into the steppe. Dust penetrated everywhere, covering food, clothes, and people's faces with a gray layer. In winter, iron stoves were placed in the tents, which glowed red hot, but the heat was instantly blown out through the cracks. People slept in their clothes, covering themselves with whatever they had, and still froze. Fires from these stoves were commonplace, destroying entire neighborhoods in minutes. Once the physical problems of survival had been solved, a new enemy came to the fore: cabin fever. In cramped, isolated dwellings, cut off from the world by endless snow or prairies, people's psyches began to fail. The walls designed to protect began to oppress, causing claustrophobia and paranoia. The monotony of the environment and the lack of external stimuli led to deep depression. This was especially difficult for women who spent most of their time at home. The monotonous howling of the wind, which continued for days on end, became torture for the mind. People began to hear voices, music, or cries for help in it. The silence inside the house rang in their ears, causing people to talk to objects or to themselves. The window was the only television, but it showed the same static picture of the horizon. The lack of visual variety led to sensory deprivation. The cramped conditions provoked outbreaks of uncontrollable aggression, even in the most harmonious families. The inability to leave, slam the door, and be alone turned minor domestic quarrels into tragedies. People began to hate each other's habits, how they chewed, how they breathed, how they walked. Knives and axes were hidden away when they felt a fit of rage approaching. Keeping one's sanity was more difficult than keeping warm. At the center of any dwelling, whether it was a dugout or a log cabin, was a source of heat, a hearth or a stove. It was a sacred place, an altar of survival, around which the whole life of the family revolved. The cast iron stove was the most expensive and heavy item they carried with them across the country. It made it possible to cook hot food, dry clothes, and simply not freeze to death. Knowing how to use the stove was an art on which comfort depended. On the treeless plains, the fuel was not coal or wood, but dried bison dung, chips. Collecting this fuel was a daily chore, sometimes humiliating for those accustomed to the forests of the East. It burned with a hot, even flame, producing almost no smoke, but it burned quickly. The smell of burning dung was a distinctive aroma of the prairies, one that was remembered for a lifetime. Piles of stored fuel near the house were a sign of thriftiness and a guarantee of survival. Baking bread in the oven was a daily ritual that required skill. Yeast was guarded like the apple of one's eye, with sourdough starter passed from neighbor to neighbor. Fresh bread was a symbol of civilization and the main joy on the table. The smell of baking in a cramped hut created a feeling of comfort and security, overpowering the smells of dampness and smoke. Food was not just nourishment, but emotional support. The fire in the stove had to be kept going around the clock in winter, which required constant vigilance. If the fire went out at night, the water in the bucket would turn to ice by morning. The coals were carefully raked over at night so that the flame could be quickly rekindled in the morning. Losing the fire was a disaster, as matches were in short supply. Often people had to go to their neighbors for burning coals, carrying them in a pot through the snow. The chimney was the most dangerous part of the structure, causing many fires. In dugouts and huts, chimneys were often made from materials at hand, coated with clay. The clay cracked and sparks fell on the thatched roof or dry grass. A fire in the step destroyed a house in minutes, leaving the family with nothing. Cleaning the chimney was dirty, but essential work. In the evening, the whole family gathered around the stove. It was a time for communication and passing on experience. Here they read the Bible, told stories, and repaired clothes and shoes. The heat from the stove outlined a zone of comfort and safety. The further away from the stove, the colder and darker the world became. This brought the family together physically and emotionally. In the absence of normal furniture, the stove was also used for other purposes. Water for washing and bathing was heated on it, and herbs and berries were dried on it. The oven served as a safe for valuables or a place where chickens hatched under a brooding hen. The stove was a universal tool, the heart of the household. It was polished and decorated, and its shine was a source of pride. Ultimately, not all stories of the struggle for a home ended in victory. The prairies and mountains are littered with the ruins of dwellings that did not withstand the test of time or fate. Abandoned farms, ghost towns, and the skeletons of huts are monuments to defeat. The reasons for leaving varied: drought, epidemics, economic collapse, or simply exhaustion from the endless struggle. When people left, nature immediately began the process of reclaiming its territory. The roof was usually the first to give way. Without the heat of the stove and constant repairs, the wooden beams rotted and the turf was washed away by the rain. The collapse of the roof exposed the interior of the house to the winds and snow. What had been a refuge became a trap for debris and tumbleweeds. Birds or random travelers would break the windows, and the house would go blind. The wooden walls turned gray under the sun and wind, turning into the skeleton of a building. The boards brought with such difficulty were taken away by neighbors or travelers for firewood. In conditions of resource scarcity, the abandoned house became a donor for others. All that remained of it was a stone foundation or a chimney sticking out like a finger pointing to the sky. It was a slow erasure of the memory of people. In the ghost towns that sprang up around the mines, the process of destruction was even faster. Buildings, hastily constructed for quick profit, fell apart within a couple of years after the mine closed. Saloons where music once blared, filled with sand. The wind slammed the doors, creating an eerie symphony of desolation. These ruins were a reminder of the futility of human ambitions in the face of eternity. Archaeology of such places tells us more about the lives of the settlers than books. In the rubbish left at the doorstep, you can find fragments of crockery, children's toys, and tools. These little things suggest that people left in a hurry or, on the contrary, prepared carefully, taking only the most valuable items with them. An abandoned doll or a cracked cast iron pot are silent witnesses to personal dramas. We have traveled from earthen burrows to fortified farms, from the icy captivity of the mountains to the scorching deserts. We have seen how people use snow, mud, and wood to create not just walls, but hope for the future. Each of these shelters was a human response to the cruel challenge of the wild. They built, lost, left, and built again, driven by the belief that somewhere beyond the horizon, things would be better. This story is not about architecture, but about unyielding will and the strength of family. It is about how the warmth of home can defeat the icy silence of loneliness. Lessons in survival on the frontier teach us to appreciate the comforts we take for granted today. After all, behind every warm home is a story of those who froze to pave the way. Which of these construction stories impressed you the most? Could you survive a winter in an earthen burrow or in the snowy captivity of the Rocky Mountains? Write in the comments what other aspects of life in the Wild West you would like to learn about in future videos. And be sure to subscribe to the channel so that we can continue this journey into the past together.